Defenders of the president, including members of Congress like Devin Nunes, who were in the room for that security briefing about Russia meddling, they keep saying that President Trump has been extremely tough on Russia, but it's simply not the case. Now, I'm going to rattle off just a few examples. Trump, he's repeatedly sided with Russia over his own intelligence agencies regarding election interference, and the president also lobbied for Russia to be allowed back into the G7. It was booted after it invaded Crimea. Trump, he's also criticized and alienated European allies and NATO itself, instead propping up the Russians in the process. And that, trust me, is an abridged list. Now, former CIA officer Jack Rice, he is back to discuss that and more. I want you to put to rest not just what we heard from the president, but apparently what happened behind the scenes when Maguire testified to the House Intel Committee. You had Republicans reportedly getting up in top of their voices condemning the intelligence that was universally agreed upon by all the different agencies that the Russians were interfering, by saying that can't be the case here. They're not trying to get Trump to win here. Nobody's been tougher on them. I want to remind people what the president said in Helsinki when, again, he went against our own intelligence and he defended Putin.
They think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be. I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial.
Jack, can you just put to rest this idea that the biggest gift to Putin is, without a close second, Donald Trump? He's advancing Russian interests like no other president in our lifetime?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll put it this way. People assume that what's happening on the 2020 election is somehow different or new. It's not. In fact, what they did in 2016, and let me repeat, what the Russians did in 2016 is something they have continued to do through cyber warfare primarily, what they have continued to do and will continue to do in the 2020 election. So there is no question that that is the case. That's what they're doing. Now, the idea that they supported Donald Trump in the first place, oh, of course they did. If you go back to 2016 and you look at what the Dems were actually arguing about the invasion of Crimea, when the Russians invaded Ukraine, and that's exactly what they did. And what we saw from Donald Trump was to simply ignore it, and especially as president, to simply allow it, and to simply allow it to continue, and to do very little to nothing is almost laughable. The idea that we have seen this president, who has now taken what's going on in the Middle East and walked away completely. If you look at the influence of what's happened in the last 3 years, you know who the winners are? The winners are the Russians, because you look at what they have done in terms of taking control and influencing the Turks, what they have done in Syria, what they have done in Iran, and even what they're starting to do in Iraq and Afghanistan. Do you know who has lost in the last 3 years? And I can say this very directly. The Americans have lost. Every single one of those areas where we wanted to have influence, and we have spent trillions, with a T, trillions of dollars, and lost thousands and thousands of lives in order to have the influence that we've had. The Americans have lost in all of those areas. Now, if you look at that paradigm, the Russian win, the American loss, you tell me, if you're the Russians, who do you stand behind? You stand behind the guy who brings it to you. And lately, at least the last 3 years, this president, Donald Trump, has brought this and handed this to the Russians and said, either thank you very much, or I'm so oblivious, I don't know what's going on. All I know is I can get people to chant in Akron, or I can get people to chant in Dallas, or in San Diego, or Miami. That's what he cares about. But America cares about a whole lot more, and they should, in Akron and San Diego and Dallas and Miami.
Jack, last question from me. Between some of the hacks being appointed to the leadership positions and people with lifetime services to Intel being shown the door, and between basically the definitive statement to say, unless it serves me, bury the facts, or don't bring them up at all, how close is there to having a meltdown right now in our Intel communities, or even a resignation, which is, why bother? or, I'm not even going to bring it up the food chain because it'll either be manipulated or killed. More than morale, how dangerous is it right now within the halls of the intel agencies like your old haunt here at the CIA?
How close?
Yep.
It's already happened. You can look at what's happening at State Department right now. They have been gutted from the inside out from so many people who simply have decided that they can't do what they're doing. They can't effectively do their jobs. You have seen the very same thing in the intelligence community. But you've also seen it at DIA. You've seen it at the Pentagon, too, where people simply can't do what needs to be done. And again, these people have been working in these positions for decades. And where they are now in a place is that they're supposed to fall in line and simply say yes and click their heels when this president tells them to do so, rather than to actually do what they were hired to do, what they trained to do, what they're experienced to do, and that is very simply to tell the truth.
Jack, thank you so much for your not only perspective but service as well here. Jack Rice, thank you again.
Thank you.
Up next, Joe Biden fighting for his political life as Democrats get ready for tomorrow's Nevada caucuses. Is it do or die for the former VP, or can he get his mojo back as the race enters its next phase?